first is the external presenter, and the second one is for PACE credit. Then introduce our next group of speakers. Slide decks may contain presentation material from panelists not affiliated with CDC. Presentation content from external panelists may not necessarily reflect CDC's official position on the topics covered. Next slide, please. CDC, our planners, and our presenters wish to disclose that they have no financial interest or other relationships with the manufacturers of commercial products, suppliers of commercial services, or commercial supporters. And now I'd like to introduce our next group of expert presenters. Our first presenter is Ms. Brianna Michael. She's a health scientist for the Training and Workforce Development Branch in the Division of Laboratory Systems at CDC. She has over 7 years of experience in health promotion and education, program development, program evaluation, health disparities, and child-adolescent health. Brianna currently leads various evaluation projects, such as evaluating laboratories' likelihood of using virtual reality headsets in training, ZenVR, a VR mindfulness app that aims to reduce stress levels, and the ongoing data monitoring and evaluation efforts for the CDC One Lab. Our next presenter is Amber Eberhardt. She's a health scientist and program evaluator for TWDB and the Division of Laboratory Systems here at CDC. She has over 6 years of experience in program evaluation, qualitative and quantitative data analysis. Amber started her career at CDC and the National Center for Birth Defects and Development Disabilities and the Birth Defects branch as an epidemiology assistant. She currently leads a large-scale evaluation project of the CDC's One Lab initiative. And our third speaker is Sadaba Piran, who holds a decade of experience as a dedicated monitoring and evaluation professional and adaptive data analysis. Currently, she's serving as the monitoring and evaluations manager of quality systems and analytics at APHL. She guides evaluation initiatives, examines data, and crafts comprehensive reports, visuals, and insightful conclusions. With the privilege of being a Fulbright scholar and a history collaboration with a global organization, Sadaba remains committed to merging diligent analysis with thoughtful foresight in pursuit of meaningful impacts. Our next three speakers are Ms. Brianna Michaels, Amber Eberhardt, and Sadaba Piran. Over to you, ladies.
Thank you so much, Alicia, for the warm introduction. If we could go to the next slide. Wonderful. So welcome everyone and happy Wednesday. I hope that day 2 of the One Lab Summit has been treating you all very well. And thank you again for joining us for the second session today, titled Expectations versus Reality, What a Training Needs Assessment Can Tell You About Your Laboratory, which is eligible for PACE credit. As already mentioned by Alicia, I am Brianna Michael of the CDC, and I am joined today alongside both Amber and Sudapa. And so today we will be covering a brief overview of a training needs assessment, or a TNA for short, how to develop a training needs assessment, how to collect data for a training needs assessment, and finally, we'll see some real world examples of training needs assessments. So after attending today's basic level instructional session, you should be able to describe what a training needs assessment is, the data collection tools needed for a training needs assessment, and the steps taken to conduct one. Additionally, you should be able to identify, understand, and prioritize the training needs in the laboratory, understand and explore how needs assessments principles can be used to address training needs in the laboratory, And finally, apply proven strategies from past experiences to enhance participation rates in needs assessment surveys, ultimately ensuring comprehensive data collection. Alicia already touched base on this as far as our disclosure statement, so we can go ahead and go to the next slide. So to level set, I did want to share just a list of common terms, which the definitions will be dropped shortly in the chat for your awareness. For the sake of time, I will not go over each term and its definition in complete detail, but definitely feel free to utilize the definitions that will be provided. Thank you so much for dropping those in. That said, I will now turn it over to Amber, who will be providing an overview of a training needs assessment. Over to you, Amber.
Thanks, Brianna. Hi, everyone. My name is Amber Everhart. I am a health sciences and program evaluator at CDC. And in this portion of the presentation, I'm going to provide you all with a brief overview on what a training needs assessment is and how it can ultimately benefit your laboratory or organization. So needs assessments are conducted in various different industries and fields. You may be pretty familiar with the term or have even utilized them within your own organization. But to understand, ultimately it's used to understand the overall needs and assets of an organization or population of interest. So while this process may be described differently in every industry, generally speaking, a needs assessment is a comprehensive process that involves identifying the current needs and assets of an organization, community, or population. So more specifically, a training needs assessment is the process of identifying training needs and assets based on the assessment of current skills, knowledge, and abilities within the organization. Training needs assessments ultimately help organizations better understand the gaps that exist in overall organization performance. So for the purposes of this presentation, we're going to hone in more on the training needs assessment aspect. So before conducting your training needs assessment, there are essentially 3 different levels to consider. The first level is organizational, and organizational assessments analyze the training needs by better understanding the gaps in skills, knowledges, and abilities of an organization as a whole. So there are several factors such as demographics, political trends, technology, the economy that play a huge role in organizational level assessments. While as the second level is occupational, or also known as task. The second level can also be known as operational in some models, but for the purposes of this presentation, we will refer to this level as occupational. So similar to the organizational level, as you see on the screen, occupational assessments identifies and analyzes the gaps in skills, knowledge, and abilities in an occupational group. So this assessment is used to better understand skills, knowledge, and abilities for employees to successfully complete their job. And then the last and third level is individual. So pretty self-explanatory, but the individual level assessment identifies and analyzes the skills, knowledge, and abilities for an individual. So this assessment is used to better understand training gaps for employees to ultimately enhance work performance. So for the purposes of this presentation, we will focus primarily on organizational and occupational level assessments. So there are many benefits to conducting a training needs assessment that you may or may not be aware of, but I would really like to highlight 3 main reasons why it's important to formally assess the training needs within your organization. So the first reason assessing your training needs is important is because it provides data-driven evidence. And so having data-driven evidence on training needs on your organization or specific occupational group allows for better informed decisions, particularly real-time decisions as it relates to training and workforce development. The second reason assessing your training needs is important is because it provides clear organizational direction. And so identifying and understanding the gaps in training needs within the organization allows for better organizational strategy and allows organizations to assess whether current skills, knowledge, and abilities within the organization itself are meeting mission critical needs, which is really important. And then the third reason I would like to highlight why a training needs assessment is important is because it promotes organizational growth. And so by understanding organizational training needs, it allows organizations to meet needs by improving skills, knowledge, and abilities from an organizational, occupational, and individual level. So now that you all know what a needs assessment is, you understand the importance of doing or conducting a needs assessment, rather, you may be sitting here asking yourself right now, how often should I conduct a training needs assessment in my organization? And the short answer is it depends. And I'm going to give you a little bit more explanation to this answer, just to kind of give you a little context. So if your organization has the capacity, you may be able to conduct a training needs assessment annually. However, just being realistic, knowing that there are organization priorities and things that may happen throughout the year, you may not be able to conduct a needs assessment for for every 2 to 3 years, rather. So it's important to consider external factors to determining the cadence of conducting a needs assessment, such as organizational strategic planning and funding cycles and/or periods. All right, so now that we understand what a training needs assessment is, let's dive a little bit deeper into how to develop one. So this is generally speaking, this on the screen, you see key components of a needs assessment report, and you may be familiar with this structure with different reports, scientific reports that you've done. But a training needs assessment generally is communicated in a report format, such as the components that are listed on the screen. So there are 4 key components to a training needs assessment. The first component is an introduction or background section. So generally speaking, the introduction and background section describes the purpose and overall goal of your needs assessment. And additionally, this section provides background information about what you are assessing. The second component is the methods section. And so this section describes the types of data that you will be collecting and how the data will be collected. So in this section, you can use or include frameworks or approaches to guide your assessment. And so later in today's session, Brianna is actually going to cover some of those different approaches to collecting data to assess your training needs. And then the third component is results and/or findings section. So that's pretty self-explanatory, but this section provides findings and interpretation of data collected from your training needs assessment. And then the last and final component is the conclusions and recommendations section. So this section provides overall conclusions and recommendations from your training needs assessment based on the data that's collected. So your recommendations should be based on findings and interpretation. So essentially data-driven recommendations. So now I will turn it over to Brianna to discuss the steps to conducting a needs assessment. Over to you, Brianna.
Thank you so much, Amber. So now that we've had the chance to level set about a needs assessment and training needs assessments, we'll shift to the overall steps that are needed to conduct one. You'll need to begin with planning your needs assessment. So for example, and somewhat of what Amber touched on is your timeline, asking the question of who or what staff you'll be reaching out to, how you'll go about collecting the data, how will you analyze the data. Essentially, your methodology is the recipe that you'll follow for your needs assessment cake. Then you'll move on to developing questions. That's if you want to do a primary data collection from scratch, or you'll look for some existing data collection tools. For example, different surveys that already exist within your organization, or maybe those accrediting bodies and organizations that have regular needs assessments, and you can kind of pull from their questions, or just use their data and information to help determine what you can implement within your organization. From there, again, if you're doing the primary data collection, or rather both of them, once you have your questions and or your data collection tools or surveys, you'll administer the survey and begin collecting and or reviewing the data, which we'll get into in the coming slides. Finally, you'll analyze the data and use the findings to help inform and or determine the training needs and or trainings that you should offer to your staff and or your organization. So when conducting a needs assessment and collecting data, the data will ultimately help you answer some of the questions that you may have about your training staff or your laboratory needs, or even help explore questions that you didn't even consider or think about. It'll also allow you to identify what may be high priority for your laboratory to focus on, such as a specific lab competency, or maybe it can be an opportunity as it relates to developing leadership skills among senior staff or those that are in leadership roles. So that said, this brings us to questions that you all probably have as you're listening to Amber and I cover like the fundamentals of a needs assessment. So what data do I need to assess my laboratory needs, and what data is out there that I can use? So essentially, there are various types of data that you can collect and use to help plan or conduct said needs assessment. We will discuss and go through the various types of data collection tools that you'll be able to use. And so before we jump into those specific data sources and data collection tools, I did want to introduce the different types of data that can be gathered. So I know I mentioned both primary and secondary data collection. The first, being primary, is often a type of data collection that you use that consists of real-time data that you or someone on your team is currently collecting for the sake of your research needs. So an example of this would be developing a short 5-question survey to administer to your staff or team to see what skills that they need to improve on, or what are some skills that they would want to pick up and learn. Some other data sources aside from a survey include, but are not limited to, observations and interviews. And again, we'll cover a full list of them in the coming slides. The other type of data and data collection that you can do to help determine your lab's needs is the use of secondary data. So that secondary data consists of data that has been previously collected or gathered by another person, organization, or agency. Secondary data can be used for environmental scans to see what others in the industry or field are doing as it relates to your needs, but as well as your laboratory needs. Some of the data sources that can be used in secondary data collection include websites, such as APHL's Comprehensive and Rapid Needs Assessment, which we'll be discussing later on in this session as well. Other sources may include journal articles, reports, books, government publications, but again, that list is not an exhaustive one. Of course, as we're discussing and exploring the different types of data collection methods, I do want to offer both the pros and cons to each. So for primary data collection, some of the pros include that you have more control over what types of questions and data that you want to gather, because you are able to develop and use your own data sources in the form of those surveys, the interviews, the focus groups, what have you, which will then allow you to have your own data that speaks to your laboratory that will help with the data-driven decision-making that Amber touched upon during her section. Some of the limitations, however, is that it can be time and labor intensive, just to be quite honest, especially depending on your organization's capacity. So do you have enough people to actually collect the surveys, to analyze the data, to clean the data, things of that nature? That said, you will likely receive raw data that might require a little bit of manipulation. And again, you just might not have time for that with competing priorities related to your mission. So moving on to secondary data, it is certainly less time consuming. So that is certainly a benefit to utilizing it. Typically, there is a good variety of data sources and resources, so you can kind of mix and match too, to kind of help inform what you want to do within your lab or your organization. Specifically, you'll be able to see research that other individuals, organizations, and agencies have conducted in order to address a workforce development concern. So could it be, we have a lot of folks retiring, how can we make sure that we're capturing knowledge and information before they retire? Or we're seeing a lot of entry-level people come in, but they don't stick around for mid-level purposes. What's the why behind that, right? So while having all of that information available from your previous research and data is great, some of the secondary data limitations are it is not one size fits all. So just because it worked for another organization or another laboratory, that does not necessarily mean the questions will be helpful for you in your lab. Additionally, that data may not necessarily be in real time, because you do have to collect the data and then publish it. And then by the time the journal article or whatever data is readily available, it could potentially be outdated. So now that we've covered primary versus secondary, we'll also do a quick level set of quantitative versus qualitative data. We'll begin with quantitative, which are your numbers. So this could be the number of staff that are properly and correctly collecting specimen, the percentage of entry-level staff that pass the packing and shipping course, or the number of laboratory managers and supervisors that have taken a leadership course. Again, these are just frame of references for the sake of an example. So there's certainly other quantitative data that you can collect based off of your laboratory. Definitely feel free, because I'm not sure with the chat feature, but if you would like to in the Q&A, we would love to hear from you all. So if you want to share some quantitative data that you feel would be beneficial for collecting and using for a needs assessment, certainly feel free to share with us. We would love to hear. Now moving on to qualitative data, that is going to be your non-numerical data and information. So not something that we can just do counting beans or checking boxes and check marks and counting that. It'll be more so those open-ended questions that you may see on a survey, such as, please share any additional trainings that you would be interested in taking or participating in. Qualitative data can also consist of simply observing your staff as they're doing routine procedures. And if you notice that something's off, you make a note of that and you realize or count how many times across your laboratory folks might have made a minor mistake or maybe even a major mistake and realize, hey, it might be time for another refresher training of some sort. You can also conduct interviews or focus groups with your staff. So again, with those interviews, focus groups, observations, they are going to take a bit of time and some resources. So just keep that in mind for your particular lab and your capacity. So when talking about like the interviews, an example would be maybe you're thinking of developing a training geared towards laboratory managers and supervisors. So one thing you could do is interview those managers and supervisors before and after a certain supervisor level training course that they may have to take. And in those interviews, you can ask what the managers and supervisors, what their thoughts are on the course. What do they feel like the course is missing as it relates to their daily jobs and roles and duties, specifically around their thoughts and attitudes around their leadership skills. So now we will go into a little bit more detail about the different types of data collection or evaluation tools that exist. Both on this slide and the next slide, this is not an exhaustive list, so there are different ones that are available. But I want to include some of the more highly used ones that exist out there. So for example, I know I touched on surveys and questionnaires. I feel like that's one that the majority of folks are very familiar with. And I made sure to include for all the different types of data collection tools, the format, whether it's qualitative, quantitative, or both, some examples that are relevant to you all with the work that you do in the laboratories, some of the strengths with that, as well as some of the limitations. So I will pause there because I don't want to read through everything. I'll give it about a minute, and I know this session is being recorded, so this information will be available at a later date as well. Okay, and we can go to the next slide. And so some additional examples of data collection include records and attendance. This is one that I really wanted to highlight because it's not one that most people kind of think of as far as a data collection tool, so to speak, but it's one along with registration forms and sign-up sheets that's very important in telling because it lets you know what folks are interested in taking, how often you should probably offer a training. Let's say it's a very popular one that a lot of folks sign up for and are really excited about, but you're only able to offer it once a year. That will help inform you that, hey, maybe we should offer it once a quarter, once a month. That way we can give folks the opportunity to sit and take this training or complete this training. Okay. And we can go on to the next slide. So we have a resource, because I know that was a question that did pop up in the Q&A as far as, hey, is there a resource? Where can I go to see what an example of like a checklist for a needs assessment consists of. We have that for you. So certainly feel free to utilize the link that will be dropped in the chat for that. But that concludes our portion of just level setting what a needs assessment is, how to go about it. I will now turn it over to Sudaba, who will share her experience of conducting needs assessments in a real world setting. So over to you, Sudaba.
Thank you. Hello, everyone. I'm Sudaba Farnian, and as Alicia introduced, I'm very honored to be here. Thank you, Brianna and Amber, for your great presentations. I'm here to talk about the different approaches that APHL took while doing a training need assessments. And at APHL, we are following the same structure as Brianna and Amber shared, and we are using the same terminologies. Next slide, please. So during this presentation, I'm going to talk about two things. First, compare APHL technical training need assessment approaches, the different versions that we have from the thorough one to the more detailed one, and then talk about our next approaches about refined and systematic training need assessment that we are planning for the future. Next slide, please. So the first example that I want to talk about is the comprehensive training need assessment. This has been the traditional way that at APHL we have been assessing the training needs of our member laboratories. And one example is the 2018 TNA. Next. So in this example, there are three main things that are actually covered. This is a thorough assessment, meaning that the participation is, of course, high, and our target audience is a broad audience. And we are looking for more longer-term training needs to assess, let's say, the public health community training gaps. This TNA was distributed to approximately 5,000 recipients in 2018, and it collected data for about 6 weeks, and we did not have a great response rate. It was 17% response rate, but it did produce great publications that are out there in APHL website that my colleague will share the link later in the chat. So this was a thorough assessment. The audience were, of course, a bigger group, and we took insights from staff and supervisors, meaning we asked staff, laboratory staff, for instance, in this case, what their training needs were, what they felt were their training needs, and we asked their supervisors what they feel their staff's training needs are. And using that data, we had a statistical analysis and came up with the top training gaps around the nation. We also looked at the training preferences and priorities. There were priority topics, and there were some different delivery methods. This was before COVID, so in-person, in-classroom sessions were, of course, at the time had high interest, and of course, most of our training topics and the data that we had showed that the delivery method is preferred to be in-person, but we did have e-learning and self-paced followed by that. So that has changed over time, especially with COVID and remote work and the ability to hold trainings and workshops more virtually. Next, please. So the findings showed that there is, of course, some top training needs across community. There are similar gaps that in most laboratories, I would say the top 10, there were a lot of matches and a lot of similarities between the top training needs that we found, as well as their method of delivery, as I mentioned. That was about the 2018, and the report is available on the APHL website as well. Could you please advance it for me? Thank you. The next example that I want to talk about was a rapid TNA. So we again needed to do a training need assessment, and that happened in early 2021. As you can guess, it was right after the pandemic hit, and it was during the pandemic. And we needed to do a refresher training needs assessment, meaning we needed to assess now what our members and laboratorians need. Next, please. So with the agile adaptation or the rapid TNA that we had, again, we used a survey platform. However, considering the time of our laboratory directors and APHL members, as well as the COVID testing, we had a period of 2 weeks to gain the responses from the team. It was difficult with the survey fatigue to have a high response rate. So we actually assigned our APHL staff members to serve as interviewers and call 99 COVID testing laboratories in the US and ask the questions that we have on training needs assessment. We had close to 80%, to be exact, 78% response rate for this training need assessment. It was quick, it served the immediate need that we had at the time, and it served a specific target audience that we were looking for. We had the team of interviewers conducting interviews on the phone, talking to 99 public health laboratories who had testing at the time, and directly putting the information in the electronic platform that we had for the survey. Another highlight of this rapid TNA was that it identified essential training needs. So it identified training priorities. What are the priorities right now? What are the priorities in this field or versus another field? Next, please. So as I mentioned, it served an immediate need in the specific population, which at the time was the testing public health laboratories. And we could obtain quick responses to address the urgent training needs questions at the time. And again, reports are available on the APHL website for this training needs, and it's called the COVID-19 Training Needs Assessment Report. Next, please. We looked at the traditional training and then also saw the benefits of the rapid training. However, there were some challenges with that too. There were a lot of pressure on our surveyors or the interviewers and the respondents. So for the traditional mode, there is a lot of pressure on the respondents trying to figure out 40 to 50, even more questions and answering them. And on the rapid mode, the interviewers had to put a lot of time and effort. The comprehensive one, it's valuable for high level, I would say, overall needs, the traditional TNA that we had and the example that I shared from 2018. And it really is for a broad target audience. And though it is a lengthy survey and it could somehow affect the response rate. On the rapid, it's for a specific target population. It serves a quick need. And there is also shorter surveys because it's delivered in a form of an interview. Next, please. So looking ahead and what actually our APHL team and the ones who we're working on the training need assessment, we made a shift from the traditional TNAs. And we are doing a real-time TNA or training need assessments. Next, please. So in this real-time assessment, we have different training needs and different templates or tools for each scientific areas. So there are no same questions for all scientific areas for everyone. So one person had to take 50 questions and answer things that are not related to them and see options that are not related to their field, but they are actually scientific area specific. We are working on widespread promotion of QR codes at conferences. So these training needs assessments be available in real time and online. So anytime people can access it and provides their input from each laboratory or from our target audience. We are working to have it accessible via learning management system, and also which creates ease of access for participants as well. We have collected one round of data, and the data are available. As my colleague put it in the chat, the reports are available in the APHL website on the under training need assessments. We are working to put together all of these in a dashboard, so it's continuously being monitored as well as observed. And once we launch the real-time need assessment officially, everything would be out there. Next, please. Here are some of the examples of the reports that we have built. Feel free to look at different reports that's provided in the link, and let us know if you have any questions. Next. And thank you so much. It's the refined TNA approach has helped us get the pros of both the comprehensive and TNA methods, and it's helped us have the training more accessible and timely for our participants, as well as helping the leadership and their strategic decision making. Thank you very much for your time.
Thank you, ladies. It looks like we don't have any questions, or the questions that we did have, they have been answered. So if no one has any other questions, I'll turn it over to you, Blanche.
Thank you, Alicia, and thank you, ladies, for such rich information about training needs assessments. We all know how important training can be to the work that we do, and so making sure that we are figuring out what types of training and what training topics are needed is really critical to make sure that we're successful in our respective roles. So thank you all very much. We're going to take a short break, and we will be back to talk about our next topic. And we look forward to seeing you at, let's see here, at 1:30. But before we go, I do want to make sure that everybody is aware that PACE credits or PACE contact hours are available for the training needs assessment presentation. In order to receive a PACE certificate after listening to the presentation that you just listened to today, make sure that you log into your OneLab Reach account, visit the link that's included in the chat, and use the passcode to complete the evaluation within 2 weeks. As I mentioned before, you need to be logged into your OneLab Reach account to access the evaluation. You'll also receive an email containing these instructions at the end of the day if you missed the link in the passcode that we've had in the chat. PACE certificates should be immediately available after you complete the evaluation on your OneLab Reach, in your My Learner Hub. And as I mentioned before, we're going to pause for a short break while we get Joe Rothschild with us to join us for a live and interactive walkthrough of OneLab VR. We'll be back at 1:30. Look forward to this. Thanks.